You survive the Nam, you get to live forever, man.
I basically tried to figure out how to avoid going to Vietnam because I saw no reason to go over there. It didn't make any sense to me. I thought it was a great example where our leaders were taking kind of innocent kids and putting them into a hopeless morass with all kinds of seemingly profound political reasons, like the domino theory, which nobody talks about anymore, of why we should be there. It never made any sense to me. I never understood it. I said, I'm not going, and I did everything I could to get out of it. Went to the draft board. I took all kinds of things to make me allergic because I wanted to be wheezing. I said I was a member of left-wing organizations. I was a homosexual. I did everything in order to get out. And they finally looked at me like I was nuts, and I got out. But that was early. That was like in the early 60s. So I was very fortunate.
What we're gonna do is requisition ourselves a girl. Patrick, this is nuts.
It's what armies do.
Oh, we ain't Genghis Khan.
Hey, you're the one who's nuts, man.
You're taking your turning.
No. I ain't doing it.
Everybody else is up for this. You think you're standing up to me?
Who the hell do you think you are?
Be advised, you best just relax and try to forget about this thing.
You probably like the army, don't you, Ericksson?
This ain't the Army, Sarge.
It was a piece of reporting in the New Yorker I read, I guess, around 1969 about this character, Ericksson, who had been in a squad that had abducted and raped and killed a Vietnamese peasant girl, and how he had tried to bring them to justice. Ironically enough, when I was at Berlin in 1970, the festival was closed because of an anti-American movie made by a German, which was Casualties of War. He had made the true story, and there was such a controversy over this film because it was so anti-American. This was in the midst of the Vietnam War. The jury couldn't disband, and the festival was over. I've never seen it. I tried to track it down at one point many years later, but I've yet to, made by a German director, have yet to ever see it. I've been trying to make this movie since I read the article in the New Yorker in 1969. And because of the success of The Untouchables, and there have been some successful Vietnam movies, obviously Platoon, I got at least Paramount to let me develop the material.
David Rabe was in Vietnam. And David Rabe had already written a couple of plays, at least one that dealt with Vietnam. So this is a subject very dear to David Rabe's heart. One of the things that excited us was the fact that we wanted the screenwriter who was going to take this on to really have some experience. So David was a natural. Not only was he a great playwright, this is terrain he knew a lot about.
And I sort of relied on him for the authenticity because he had actually been to Vietnam, he'd been in the war, he'd written many plays about it. So I was guided basically by him. The script came very quickly. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. We followed the material very closely. It's a kind of a project that we've been thinking about for decades, and it all came together very quickly.
How long you been in country, Ericksson?
3 weeks.
3 weeks? Oh, man, you're breaking my heart.
It was developed at Paramount first. Dawn Steele was there. I think Dawn's attitude was, hey, we've just had a big success with The Untouchables, and let's go do this. I mean, I think she knew that the material was problematic. When we finished with the material, I think there was a reluctance to get it made at Paramount because of the darkness of the subject. At that point in time, Dawn Steele moved to Columbia, and when she was there, she said, look, you guys still want to do this? Bring it over here. Let me get it and turn around from Paramount. So Dawn deserves a lot of credit. And not only was Dawn responsible in bringing it to Columbia, but she was extremely supportive in terms of letting Brian make the movie he wanted to make.
Okay. They did it, man. They did it. You didn't think they were going to do it, and I didn't think they were going to do it, but they did it. They took her and they killed her.
What, the girl? They did it?
Oh, man, this ain't supposed to happen.
Michael embodied a kind of American innocence, even though in fact he is Canadian. He looked young enough, and he has a kind of integrity to everything he does. And he's a delightful guy to work with. I mean, it was a big challenge for him, and he looked upon it as an opportunity to move in a different area in his filmmaking career. And we were very fortunate that Dawn had a relationship with him because she used to work for his company, and he read the material and responded to it quite positively, and we never would have gotten the movie made if Michael Fox had not said he would star in it.
I think that everybody had a certain amount of courage because they felt the story had some meaning to it. Michael J. Fox took a chance, certainly in playing the kind of part that no one ever would consider plausible for him. Brian taking the chance of saying, yes, I can make this work with Michael J. Fox. And Sean saying, I'm going to go along with this. I'm going to give it a try. I think it's going to work.
You know what this bullshit's about? The fucking Kong's in town tonight. His wife's off limits. Charlie's in the whorehouse.
I think what was interesting about Sean and why he brought so much to the movie is that Sean understood the tragedy of this guy. Sean took on the, quote, villain of the piece with great thoughtfulness and great heart. I'm sure, without ever asking Sean, in his mind, this was a loyal, good, tough soldier. This is a guy that when he was 15 was probably the leader of the kids in his neighborhood. He was, probably captain of his football team. He was not a guy who was part of a gang or something. I mean, he was a guy that really turned. I mean, he had maybe some of those things in him, but it took confronting Vietnam to go bad. And so I think Sean brings enormous thoughtfulness to a truly tragic antagonist,
Motherfucker, you think you're standing up to me? Ah!
Sean kind of responds to the material. He either likes the material or doesn't like the material. And he has had a long relationship with art. Art started him in his career, basically. And he just read the script and wanted to do it. And that was great for us because, he's one of the great actors of his generation. And the combination of Michael and he, I thought would make a very exciting movie. We have to sort of pay a tribute to the casting director, Lynn Stallmaster, because there are no Vietnamese actresses. The Vietnamese that came to this country did not go to acting school, and there are not too many plays where Vietnamese actresses can act in, so it's like there are no Vietnamese actresses. But I didn't want to make her Filipino, I didn't want to make her Chinese, I didn't want to make her Japanese, I wanted to make her Vietnamese. So we literally looked all over the world. Lynn went everywhere. And we found a whole bunch of, obviously, immigrants in Paris. And Twee had seen a casting notice on she was just a high school girl, I think. And had just seen a casting notice, and she wanted to meet me. She'd, liked my movies or something, so she just came in order to meet me. And I put her in a couple of improvisations, and she was remarkable.
I think having a girl as part of the film actually changed the spin on it a little bit. It was, people like to think of war as about men, and suddenly you see this helpless girl on the set and it's all wrong. Everything feels wrong, all this equipment and all this, all these guns and all of the muscle of war.
Reserve, man. He's unbelievable. I mean, what we're doing, it's fantastic.
We were in Chicago, and that's where I found John Riley. I would put together a unit, a secondary squad of very good actors to just be there in case we needed, some lines thrown in from Americans. They would just stay through the whole shoot, and one of them was John Riley.
Is that a farmer diddy-bopping down there, or is that VC? Where? Right there in the pool.
And then I was having some problems with the guy I had cast to play the part. He was playing it in a way that I felt was a little goofy. And Art kept on saying, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. I think I can make this guy work. And he said, well, you better make up your mind because, if we should change him, we should change him now. So literally, we'd let John Riley go home. And it's like a 24-hour flight back to Chicago from where we were in Phuket. And he literally stepped off the plane in Chicago and got a message from me to get back on the plane and come back to Vietnam. And he literally got back on a plane and flew another 24 hours. Stepped off the plane, and I had him shooting a scene that morning, where the scene where he says, we're like Genghis Khan, and they're walking up on the ridge together.
It's just like Genghis Khan, man.
And he was a delightful character actor, and the same thing with John. I found him in New York, and again, we brought him over as part of the squad. I've been very fortunate in, going into Chicago or Boston or even London. Finding people when I'm trying to cast a movie and looking all over the world, basically. That was very true of Casualties of War. We sent them to training school. Dale Dye was there. He trained the soldiers in platoon. Dale would take them out and train them like he was training a squad of recruits.
You on my frequency?
Yes, sir.
You fucking maggot!
And then we had another, a little more crazy guy that I finally had to fire, who was just too crazy. I mean, they were coming in hurt. I had actors, you know, with all kinds of bruises. And then one time, I looked at these actors in the morning rehearsal. They were all exhausted. And I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We were doing night assault, amphibious assault." And I said, "What?" They were doing amphibious assault. And I said, "Are you crazy?" And they said, "Well, you know, we thought we should do it." These guys sort of, you know, their attitude is, we'll take these actors and turn them into soldiers. And these guys were really putting these guys through hell. And the actors were trying to keep up with it, but some of them were actually getting hurt. I mean, they were physically getting hurt because it was just too difficult what they were doing. So I finally had to fire one guy. And he calls up Sean in the middle of the night and says, "I want you to assemble your squad out on the quadrangle at, you know, 0200 or something." And Sean goes, "What?" Because Sean was the Sarge. Sean went through the basic training flawlessly. He hung out with the Vietnam soldiers that were our technical supervisors. He was in incredible physical shape. And he never associated with Michael J. Fox. He just stayed with his guys, which created a tremendous amount of tension between them when we were shooting.
This is kidnapping, ain't it, Sarge?
Take the point. Go relieve Hatch on point.
Why?
You got the point.
Eric Schwab, who's worked for me since Body Double, has a tremendous visual eye. And I basically sent him out to find where we were going to shoot this movie. We found the best places in Thailand that were close to Vietnam as we could get. I wanted to make it as authentic as possible. And Eric found all these incredible places. And he shot a lot of the second unit stuff where you see the four of them going up the mountains or whatever. That's all Eric with a second unit group.
We built an entire army base. I mean, you know, and he does have some big angles in the movie where you pull back and you realize you're on an army base. I mean, that was just built out of thin air. But, you know, Brian made use of the terrain there. I mean, you're always feeling angles. You're always sensing that you're in the world of where Vietnam is.
The most important thing visually about the jungle is there are no landmarks. You're immediately lost. And the jungle at night is your worst nightmare. And there's never been a darker dark and a more terrifying place to be.
Okay, Ericksson, set Claymores on the left flank.
It's like you're flying around in outer space. You have no bearings, which is very much like the Vietnam War was. You couldn't tell the good guys. Was he a Viet Cong? Is he Vietnamese? Is he on my side? Is he on their side? There are no signs indicating which way to go or who to believe.
Sorry, Gook, Sarge! One of them gooks from the Ville! What? You recognize them people in this shit? Man, I saw him!
And then I got this idea of this sort of ant farm where you sort of, you know, when you fall through the ground into the tunnels, which is even more of a scary place because now you're in a dark tunnel and there's a whole world down there that's beneath the sort of nowhere world you are above.
What Brian does is always in the course of a movie, there's 4 or 5 sequences that really excite him visually. And he spends an enormous amount of time planning and strategizing how they're going to unfold. And so I guess what people, when they look at his best films and say, God, how easy that must be, I mean, I don't think they realize how cleverly intricate they are and how much time Brian spends in the planning of them.
What we literally did was take a section of jungle and turned it into a soundstage. We rigged it for rain, we lit it from the top, and anytime I wanted to shoot another place in the jungle, we'd move around the jungle a little bit and you'd be in another place. And you could be 5 yards away or 100 yards away or 5 miles away. You couldn't tell the difference.
The dilemma that's set up in the beginning of the film right away, that Sean Penn rescues Michael J. Fox, And in the end, Michael J. Fox, of course, informs on Sergeant Meserve because he's done this heinous crime.
Maybe if you had been there, sir. Maybe if you had heard her screaming.
So along the way, we get a sense of Sergeant Meserve, who really seems to be a soldier, and a good soldier, certainly beginning doing the job that he's sent to do. He changes because of the environment he's put in, and his craziness or his sadism or whatever really gets to come out.
Take it easy, man. Yeah, that was easy.
At the same time, Michael J. Fox is just this innocent put in a situation.
Wouldn't do it, would you?
Bring your girl? Are you crazy?
This is the one, Sarge. She's the pretty one. Take the pretty one.
The abduction was so heart-wrenching when they abducted her from the village. It's just hard and impossible to watch. It's just so moving. And you know where it's all headed. I mean, Sean's character sort of laid it out right from the beginning.
Because what we're gonna do is requisition ourselves a girl. Little portable R&R.
And you sort of give him his motivation because he lost his buddy to these guys. And this was his way to revenge.
We're gonna interrogate the prisoner. This isn't right.
But Ericksson didn't want to participate, and of course they branded him a coward and challenged his manhood.
Oh, what's the matter? Don't you like girls? Haven't you got a pair? Is that your problem?
And then there was, when the inevitable is going to happen, how do you show it? I had never used a really big close-up in the movie, and I thought this point of view shot of him sort of watching them, you know, with these lap dissolves, each one going in and having their way with this girl. It's a reoccurring theme in my movies of the character that's powerless to do anything. And it's what happens in life a lot of the times. You see horrible things being done. You know if you try to prevent them, you put your own life and career at jeopardy. But you have to live through the pain of not doing anything. In the actual point of view shots, from Ericsson's point of view, we used a body double because nudity in the Far East in this area is verboten. Girls just aren't allowed to do it. So we had to get a body double to double her in those sequences. So Tweed, we had to play the emotional things after she gets beaten.
I'm saying I'm going up there, man. Ericksson, you stay here.
You know these terrible things have been done, but you have not seen her. You know she's been beaten and raped, and then suddenly you have to confront what you have not been able to prevent in the most intense way imaginable. You were there right next to her, and she turns around and you see this beaten, swollen, hysterical little girl, and you think, oh my God.
Oh, God.
And he again tries to help her, but he doesn't move fast enough, and he's afraid he's going to be court-martialed for being a deserter.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can't do this. I can't do it. You don't understand.
So again, he sort of doesn't do the heroic thing, and which ultimately leads to her death.
I do remember we found this spot, and it was about an hour and a half from Bangkok, and it was the original bridge on the River Kwai. For all kinds of reasons, visual as well as historical reasons, we said that's the place.
It was a very harrowing shoot. And I guess the worst thing about it was the material. It was so relentlessly tragic. You knew this poor girl was ultimately going to be killed, and that's where it was all headed. It just weighed on you, just day in and day out.
We gotta waste her, Sarge. She's gonna get us lit up.
Many of Brian's films also are quite musical, if you will, in that they have a certain pace that goes very quickly and is very big and draws your attention visually, and then slows down a bit to allow you a moment to rest before it brings you into the next part.
Do it! Do it! Yes! Do it!
And in the scene on the train trestle, it was sort of building from the beginning, really, from the time that Michael J. Fox shoots off his gun. The men watching her struggle her way along the train trestle. And when Michael J. Fox was running down, trying to intervene. And then there's a moment when they decide that they're going to shoot her. There's this moment that's sort of really suspended animation. They don't really want to do it. They sort of know they have to. And then it's Hatcher, I think, who begins. And then it's just this cacophony. And then suddenly it's all sort of relieved by this wide shot. You can't believe what just happened. You've actually seen it happen. You couldn't help but watch because visually it was so interesting, and each cut sort of drew you to the next.
And of course, it's the irony of they're shelling them, and then ultimately, because it's a explosive depot, when the helicopters come in, they blow up the explosive, which in turn blows up our gunship. So, in fact, they blow up themselves. It's like you're just sort of capsulizing the absurdity of this war. Because again, this is a war with no sort of moral borders to it or moral lines. It's all kind of gray. It was incredibly difficult to shoot because of the heat, because of the weather. And it would be raining and the sun would come out. We'd just do this like in a cycle every day. The location was extremely far to get to. Sometimes you would get there and it would be raining and you would just go home. And that was kind of dangerous out on those railway tracks. You know, you could fall off into the water. The usual ensemble of bugs and stinging spiders and snakes all over the place. And again, it was a terribly upsetting scene to do.
Be advised, you best just relax and try to forget about this thing.
Now, this shit with that girl, that was wrong. But he's a kid, Ericksson. He's 20 goddamn years old. And you're gonna ruin his life.
Of the charges of rape and unpremeditated murder, PFC Antonio Diaz is found guilty. Herbert Hatcher is found
When Michael J.
guilty
Fox
and
is standing at the court-martial and the sentence that has been handed down that all the men are guilty and have to go to jail.
5 Tony Meserve is found guilty.
The audience is on pins and needles because we're wondering, okay, are they going to hit him on the way out, or is there going to be any sort of confrontation at all? And of course, Diaz goes by, and Hatcher goes by, and Clark sort of gives him a dirty look. And you see Meserve say something to him. You don't really hear it. You know, Brian chose to just let the audience put whatever they wanted in their minds about what was said at that moment. And you know, he's promising some sort of retribution. And so it's really a little bit scary, wondering what Meserve has said to him.
And if I was them, I'd be pissed off, wouldn't you? I'd be looking for a little payback.
There was a movie made in the 60s, I think. Eli Ericksson made a movie called The Visitors. He had also read this story in the New Yorker. So his son wrote a screenplay called The Visitors, which is based on the guys getting out of jail and coming back to Ericksson for payback. So we had another ending, which is sort of what was the Kazan picture. We had sort of this nightmare sequence where they do come back. And there was a tremendous controversy over this. And this became a great bone of contention between David Rabe and I, because we wrote this nightmare ending, and then we sort of decided to go with the redemption ending. But he was never happy with it when he saw it. In fact, he was very unhappy with the way it ended, even though, in fact, he had written it. And I refused to change it. I said, I can't go through life thinking about Ericksson every day, waiting for those guys to, you know, get out of the brig and come and get him. I feel that it's more in fitting with our feelings about Vietnam, which was, it was a terrible nightmare. What I wanted to sort of show, basically, was the Vietnamese recovered. What's our problem? You know, because, you know, many Vietnamese came here, started new lives. You know, they managed to go on with their lives. And I wanted to have that feeling at the end of this movie that this terrible nightmare had happened, but you cannot let this wound not heal. You've got to move on. And that's what I wanted to suggest by having Ericksson see a Vietnamese that had moved on, maybe he could move on.
Xiao
Do I remind you of someone?
Yeah.
I made Twee play the part, but I put glasses on her and a different nose.
You had a bad dream, didn't you?
She couldn't have the same voice, so I had her voice dubbed by Amy Irving. So she's a different girl, but she's Vietnamese, and she reminds him of the girl from the village.
It's over now, I think.
Once we sort of get those emotions and that visual storytelling to a point that Brian's comfortable with, then he likes to put in some music to add another element. In Casualties of War, we were editing before we had computers, so we, as we often did with his films, we would copy onto the magnetic film pieces of score of other movies that he had selected from his discs at home, and then we would try them against the scenes. Many of them were Ennio Morricone's music, like from The Thing and some other films. The effect of using this temporary music also was a way that Brian could help indicate to the composer, in this case Ennio, the places where he wanted music. In the scene where Michael J. Fox is in the hole and the guys in the tunnel approaching him, there's a tension music there that's very specific and yet very exciting in a visceral way.
Oh, thank God! Ooh. Okay, come on,
With regard to the woman who was in danger, a lot of that sort of jungle setting seemed to evoke for Ennio, and I guess for Brian too, this pan flute, which is a very specific sound.
Give.
It can be a very melodic, sort of eerie, celestial sound, if you will. After she's been raped and she's in that hooch, it generates a feeling of sadness, which underlines what's happening there, and is really, really emotionally very gripping.
No more.
In a couple of parts of the film, especially in the end where the end credits are, Ennio had these voices, this chorus, as another musical element. These type of voices contribute a little bit to the hopeful feeling. For me, it evoked so many of the souls of the people who were killed in this war, and yet it helped us feel like we were rising above it and changing, and these voices created a good feeling, and I think that was very important to the ending of the film. Sad, but yet somewhat hopeful.
There was this 1 minute, you know? I had this chance. I could have got her out of there.
I thought it was a remarkably good movie. Once I saw it all put together, I went, oh my God, it's a remarkably good movie, and audiences are going to have a tough time dealing with this. No one wants to think that young American boys can turn so evil in such a short time. It's a hard pill.
You drag her out there and rape her! And then you blame her for coughing, so you kill her!
This was a tough story. And so it was interesting to see Brian at that stage of his life, you know, wanting to take the tough road. I'm glad to see that some people are now sort of looking at the movie and going, oh, wait, this was really good. We didn't look carefully enough.
And they take this girl, they tie her up, they drag her out, and they fucked her and they killed her, man. This ain't supposed to happen.
Casualties of War is a film that has a very, very strong point. There's a strong point of view, and it has a lot to say about the horrors of war. I felt very good that Brian was pleased with it, that he really thought it was a good film. And so maybe it wasn't the big box office success, but I think that, as so many of his films are, that people on second viewing or second consideration start to understand that as a filmmaker, his films are just so intriguing that you can't help but want to be interested in them.
God, very good, guys. I'm very proud of it. I think it's a great blending of my particular style with a great screenplay and a great story. And I feel I understand that war better by seeing this film.
I've heard a lot of fucking screaming in this country. Most of it's come from wounded American boys.
Vietnam is a tragic melody that just suddenly stops, and there's no reason for it. You'll never be able to explain it. It's like you have some type of terrible pain and then suddenly it stops. You don't know why, and you thank God it's not coming back.
It's over now, I think. Ciao, Unc.